Hello, my lovely friends. I'm going to wait a moment to see if anyone's out there. Since I have done this before, which has been a while, I can see that Facebook has made some dubious enhancements of the possibility for live video. They have offered me some voice changes. So I was reluctant to click that because it just felt like stepping into an abyss of possibility, basically. So I am here with my normal voice, despite the offerings from Facebook to change. And I thought we could chatter about the connection between our eyes and our nervous system. It's something that I've become really fascinated with, not only because I spend a lot of time online, and I think that this is true for so many of us, but because the world is actually organizing itself around us having a narrow gaze, and that is intimately impacting us in ways that we might not be aware of, and also that we don't necessarily have the skills to do something about in a way that actually is possible. So that's the purpose basically of my chattering now. But I think, hi Philippa, nice to see you. I'm hopeful that I can see the little green flashing light on the audio button, so I'm hopeful that that means that you can hear me okay. It is a slightly cold and damp Monday morning here in New Zealand, but I know that those of you in the Northern Hemisphere will be experiencing probably something on the complete opposite dial of that. I know a lot of you are in extreme heat at the moment and are in the midst of summer, so I am vaguely jealous of the warmth. But way back, to go back to our eyes conversation, way back when I first started studying the nervous system, the basis of the model, if you like, that I was working to, and I really hate using that term because it implies that there are different ways that the body works when actually there are sort of different approaches to how it is we can work with and influence the nervous system. But my understanding of the nervous system and the backbone of how I approach nervous system regulation, if you like, is really based on the understanding that our parasympathetic and sympathetic responses, parasympathetic being the optimal mode of functioning for the body when we're really present to the here and now, and sympathetic being a fancy way of saying fight flight. Both of those fall under the banner of the autonomic nervous system. And what that means is that those nervous system responses, which are movement responses at their base, are unconsciously controlled. Now, how this influences my work and what I teach is that that tells us that we can't directly decide our way either into a fight flight response or out of it. We can't decide our way into a felt experience of safety on a nervous system level. But what we can do is influence how the brain is making that decision if indeed it is misplaced. Meaning that if we've got ourselves stuck in cycles of habit or experience or behavior that sees us looping around on ourselves, like a Groundhog Day type scenario, and that usually is a function of modern living, unfortunately. We're in a situation where the animal bodies that we possess are not designed for this crazy culture that we're a part of, and it's leading to quite a lot of dysfunction. So the sensory work that I teach is really about providing information to the brain that allows it to make accurate decisions about our safety in the moment. And when it is stuck in those maladaptive patterns, we can say from an observational perspective that it is not making the correct decision for us. And that's in those situations where we know that fundamentally we're absolutely safe, fundamentally everything is okay, and yet we're in a situation where our body is expressing something different. There's a dissonance between those two things. Why the eyes is really fascinating is because it is one of the things that we have direct conscious control over that also directly affects nervous system state and function. And the reason is because the nerve setup of the eye actually connects directly to the reticular activating system, which is a very big fancy term for like the integrative system of the brain. So if you can think what we're doing all day long from a brain perspective is taking sensory information in from our environment, and that is going to this integrating center, this big kind of computer hub in our brain, and the brain is using that to answer the question, are we safe? And when that question is yes, we send out a parasympathetic response. And when it is a no or a maybe, we send out a fight flight nervous system response or a sympathetic response. So that direct connection to that integrative center through our eyes means that how we're using our eyes on a daily basis is really integral to nervous system health and well-being. And what we know about modern living is that, well, let's actually flip the narrative a little bit. What we know about well-being and what we know about the types of regulation and the types of states of being that we want to emulate with our horses is that we want to be able to be present for what is, but also to be operating within soft focus. Now, soft focus means that I can be aware of visually what is in front of me, but I'm also aware of everything that is happening within my peripheral world. So I have a really expansive visual field. And that is that same beautiful, expansive visual field that we get when we're taking in a horizon or we're looking at something beautiful. Yesterday, I'm really fortunate to live in a place that's very naturally beautiful. And I went for a walk around the inlet after being on the computer for the bulk of the morning, and I could actually feel a softening of my eyes. I can't even, there's not a word to really describe what it is that I mean, but I know that you will all completely understand what it is that I'm talking about in terms of when you go from something which is really fatiguing to the gaze, and then you step into a space where everything is really expansive, and you just notice how um, insular you've been as a result of the activities that you've been a part of. So this is having an effect on us. We are, as humans, designed to be more in soft gaze than out of it. We come from hunter-gatherer stock, which meant that if our field of vision was always really narrow, that would be problematic for us to be able to literally survive. And what's more, when we think about what happens to the eyes when we move into a fight flight response, one of the first things that happens within the chain of response that we understand to be the fight flight system is that our visual field narrows, and it narrows towards the object of potential threat, which means that everything else gets pushed to the side. So that type of visual field is very similar to what you would understand a hawk or a bird of prey. That is how they operate when they really zoom in and fix their eyes on whatever it is they're looking to pick up. And so when we're looking at our phones or when we're on the computer all of the time, it is that narrow gaze of focus that's really pulling us into a very narrow experience of sensory input that we are designed to be in only for short periods of time. And when we find ourselves, as a matter of course, more often there than not, does that even make sense? More there, there a lot. Basically, it starts to impact our functioning overall. So one thing that's really important to understand, and I have lots of theories about this. I think that our our school biology classes or our school anatomy and physiology classes have a lot to answer for when it comes to understanding structure and function of the body from a living perspective. And what I mean by that is a lot of us have fallen into states of being where we understand the structure of the body to be something fixed. So the skeleton is fixed, organ placement is like here, there, and the other. It's kind of like a paint by numbers situation in the body. And when we have this false understanding of the body as fixed, then we don't really understand what is possible for us as far as changing how it is we're moving through the world. So presence alters physiology. Presence influences physiology. What do I mean by that? If we go into a fight flight response, the eyes, the whole structure of the body arranges itself in a very particular way for a very particular purpose, which is to maximize our forces of strength and acceleration, to be able to obviously survive that particular circumstance in question. Now, if we get ourselves into a situation where that's maladaptive, we have to somehow find ways of being that influence us to come out of that. And the eyes are one of our primary portals to be able to do that. So once you start to be aware of both the bony structures of the eyes and the eyeball itself, the eyeball itself sits within like a conical type socket, and you can imagine it like a horizontal or reverse ice cream cone. So the cone goes towards the back of the skull, and then you have the eyeball sitting at the front. And what's interesting, as soon as you start to map and become aware of the physiology of any different part of your body, it starts to respond to your present moment attention. And it changes its orientation in the body to one that more effectively matches the moment. So we can use these mapping practices to really pull us out of states of being that aren't conducive to the types of harmonious situations that we're wanting to create, and to actually counterbalance, I guess, to the best of our ability, the technology that's really pulling us into narrow fields of vision that is not, or that is just negatively impacting us on a nervous system level. And I see, if you look and you consider yourself the amount of time you're on your phone or on your screen, and how your gaze is really drawn into this very narrow field of focus, that's having quite a substantial effect basically on your nervous system state overall. So there's a course I'm running at the end of this week. It goes in 4 different parts, and we're really going to look at the nature of our eyes, the connection to the nervous system, and the nature of our gaze. And gaze becomes something really interesting as well, because just as different learning states can trigger different nervous system reactions, the position of our eyes, because of all the reasons I just mentioned, also has a direct impact on that as well. So if you have come to associate, I'll just give you this example, attention or awareness or concentration, meaning that you take your eyes really close to the edges of your face and you kind of lean into the experience, that's taking your nervous system to a very particular place. And when I thought about working with my horses and the way that I utilize my gaze can be critical in ways that I don't mean it to be. And gaze is an action. So if I'm observing my horses going round, say we're doing groundwork, for example, and I'm looking at them with the intention of things that aren't quite working, or things that I might perceive as wrong, or things that I would like to improve, my gaze is communicating something really specific. And perhaps also we have a problem, just for the sake of hypothetical example, maybe with the transition from trot to canter. And so my gaze precedes the cue that I might give with another part of my body that is always in communication with my horse. And these types of subtle aids that we're giving that sometimes rest outside our conscious awareness become things that you start to pick up on the more you become aware of how your particular eye position communicates different states of being. And that's something that we're going to play with as well. So we're going to look at mapping the eye socket. We're going to look at mapping the eyeball. We're going to play with your own particular form of gaze and noticing where your eyes sit in relationship to the rest of your head, where your eyes sit in relationship to presence, so how it is you communicate presence, and what it is that you can do to make sure that your eyes provide you both with a point of return and also, kind of don't know what other way to say this, so that you're not leaving yourself, basically. And that's something that I'm practicing all of the time. How can I be aware of what's going on around me without abandoning my own sense of who I am, and to kind of like stay rooted in that place. And gaze becomes a really fundamental piece in that discussion. The thing about eye sockets is that they're incredibly movable. Again, if you think about, or mobile, if you think about that bird of prey example, the sockets actually rotating in the skull to quite a large degree, depending on our nervous system state. And if they get stuck in certain patterns of rotation, based on your dominant nervous system pattern, then that can have a flow-on effect to the rest of your life. Basically, anywhere where there is a seam, there is a possibility for movement. And if you look at the anatomical structure of the skull, you'll see that there are a lot of seams and sutures in the skull, which means those bones have a lot of possibility for movement as well, and a lot of possibility for creating pressure or alleviating pressure. The same goes for the eyes. You can find that your vision actually changes when you start to move with the eyes because there's less compression on the optic nerve. So that is also impacted by the bony structure of the skull and how the optic nerve is connecting or able to connect to the back of the eyeball. So all of these things start to shift and wobble around and become mobile experiences when we are working with the eyes. But fundamentally, we're looking at mapping practices, and mapping practices are really sensory practices that relate to structure. And again, we're just going to look at the eye specifically in relationship to that. We're going to look at gaze and where the different forms of gaze, or how the different forms of gaze affect us, and what it is that we can do to create optimal experiences for ourselves. Awareness exercises around how tech is impacting us on a day-to-day, which is something that I've, like I said, become a little bit obsessed with because I notice the negative impact that that has on me. And also the direct connection of different eye placement to nervous system states. So just like the rest of the body arranges itself accordingly, depending on the outcome that it's looking to create, eye placement changes depending on the nervous system state that we're in. And the same sensory processes, the same mapping processes can help us shift out of any stuck modes of being that are seeing us loop around on ourselves. So it's a really, really powerful practice. Even if you get lost in the theory or feel like you don't have understanding of what it is I'm talking about on a nervous system level, the practical application is what we're focusing on. So each session will go for 45 minutes to an hour. I'll give you some practice things to work with over the course of the week, and the entire session really will be dedicated to practical considerations. So we'll be doing lots of movement-based practices, lots of somatic practices to really help you kind of get a clear felt sense of what I'm talking about here. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much to all of you who have been able to be here live. I really appreciate your attention in what is a world of rapid distraction. But have a wonderful rest of your day. I think the link is around here somewhere. Facebook told me that was the case anyway, and I'll see if they're telling the truth shortly. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend for those of you still in it.